Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Frank. I lived with my wife, Amber, and her 3 sisters. That's 4 grown women under one roof. And for a while, I didn't complain as I handled every single financial responsibility without asking much in return. But as things got tight, I had to speak up. I told them to cut back on expenses if they expected me to continue covering the mortgage alone. I thought we could talk it through like adults. But instead, when I came back home that evening, the locks had been changed and all my things were packed up and left outside. That one moment changed everything. What happened after that was something they never saw coming. When I think back to how things started between Amber and me, I can't help but smile. We met in the most ordinary way. From that point on, we just clicked. Amber and I dated for almost 2 years before I proposed. In that time, we became each other's best friends. There was nothing forced between us. When I finally proposed, there was no doubt in her eyes. She hugged me so tightly. The wedding wasn't some grand affair. We didn't have the budget for all that, and honestly, we didn't care. It was small in a quiet outdoor space that Amber loved. She kept telling people, "This is the beginning of everything I've ever wanted." But I also knew reality would hit fast. Before the wedding, I was living in a cramped 1-bedroom apartment. It wasn't exactly ideal for starting a family. There wasn't even space for home essentials. Amber never complained, but I knew she had dreams of raising our future kids in a home that felt warm, stable, and open. That stuck with me. So, I started planning. Long before we even set the wedding date, I began putting money aside quietly. I did it with one goal, a proper family home. I didn't tell Amber right away because I wanted it to be a surprise. But eventually, I found a house in a good neighborhood she'd mentioned. A few years into our marriage, Amber and I had had our share of ups and downs, like any couple, but we were doing okay. One evening, everything changed with a single phone call. Amber's parents had been in a car accident. They didn't make it. I still remember the sound she made when I told her. I held her for hours that night as she shook in my arms. And for the weeks that followed, I watched her fall apart in ways I never thought possible. She barely spoke. She barely ate. Just moved through the house like a shadow. That loss hit her like a train. She was her parents' firstborn with 3 younger sisters. After the funeral, it became clear they didn't really have anyone stable to go to. There were relatives in another state, but none they felt safe or close to. And I could see it in Amber's eyes. She wasn't going to let them scatter like that. She wanted them with us. She wanted to be their anchor now. Their big sister, their guardian, their everything. So we opened our home. No one forced it on me. I agreed without hesitation. I told her, if this is what you need, then we'll figure it out since it's temporary. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I believed in standing by your partner when the storms hit. That's what marriage meant to me. So her sisters moved in, and our quiet 2-person household became something bigger. I was working longer hours by then. Bills were higher, food disappeared faster, and the laundry tripled. But I didn't complain. Back then, both of us were working. Amber had a decent job at a local office. For the first 3 years, we made it work. The bills weren't light, but at least we were splitting things, more or less. I carried a bit more of the weight, sure. But Amber came home one evening and told me she quit her job. Just like that. When I asked her why, she said her job was underpaying her and that she couldn't take working under a jealous, insecure female boss anymore. Now look, I know the workplace can be hard. I know toxic bosses exist. I've had my fair share of them. But something about the way she framed it didn't sit right with me. There was no plan, no job search lined up, no savings talk, nothing. She just wanted out. I didn't argue. Maybe I should have. But I didn't want to be the guy forcing his wife to stay in a job she hated. So I said, all right, if that's your choice, I'll manage. But man, I didn't realize how deep that decision would cut. Because here's the thing. Her sisters, the ones living under our roof, still weren't doing anything either. Not a single one of them had a job. They woke up late, watched TV, scrolled through their phones, ordered takeout, and somehow found money for clothes and hair appointments. Meanwhile, I was dragging myself through long work days just to keep everything from falling apart. I was paying all the utilities, handling every damn expense, and coming home to a living room full of able-bodied adults who didn't think they owed me or the household anything. And it wasn't like they offered. Not once did one of them come up to me and say, "Hey Frank, we know you're carrying this on your back. Let us help out. Let me look for a job. Let me at least handle the groceries this week." Nothing. They just existed in that house like it was their right. And the part that really made me feel alone in all of it, Amber didn't seem to mind. She didn't defend me or push her sisters to step up. She just adapted and joined them. It wore me down slowly. I kept it to myself, because at that point I wasn't even sure if talking about it would change anything. But I felt it, deeply. For 2 years, I carried this load. I don't know how I lasted that long without snapping. I was the only one working, but what really started to eat at me was the silence and lack of acknowledgement of all my efforts. I would come home exhausted, expecting maybe a warm plate of food or even just a little peace. But instead, most evenings, the kitchen was a mess, nothing had been cooked, and Amber's sisters were either bickering among themselves or watching TV like they were on vacation. And Amber never tried to stop the chaos. She'd just disappear into the bedroom while I sat there, trying to figure out what exactly I was working so hard for. When the credit cards maxed out, I dipped into my savings. When the savings dried up, I just kept pushing, hoping the next paycheck would buy me some breathing room. But there was no relief. The longer I kept quiet, the more they believed it was normal. After a while, it started getting to me, not just in the wallet, but in my chest. It was a quiet frustration that built up day after day. I'd lie awake at night, wondering how much longer I could carry this house on my back. It got to the point where I couldn't breathe under the pressure anymore. One morning, after rehearsing what I was going to say a few times in my head, just to make sure it came out calm and respectful, I called a meeting. I love my wife, Amber. I married her knowing she came from a close-knit family, and I had no problem with her sisters staying with us temporarily. But it has been years since their parents' deaths. They didn't leave or contribute to anything. So that morning, as they all sat there in the living room, I finally spoke my mind. I told them, plain and direct, this can't continue. We need to cut back, or I'll stop paying for everything. I was trying to spark a conversation about taking responsibility and pulling together, not tearing anyone down. But the moment the words left my mouth, I could see the energy in the room shift. My wife was annoyed with my statement. Her sisters looked at each other, wide-eyed, and then the emotional backlash came flooding in. I was called controlling, embarrassing, and cold. One of them even asked me if I expected them to start scrubbing floors for rent. Amber jumped in too, acting like I'd humiliated her in front of her family, as if asking grown adults to contribute financially to a home they live in was some kind of betrayal. She said I had shamed her sisters, made them feel unwanted, like they were burdens. The irony was painful. They didn't feel like burdens when they were draining me dry, but now that I'd asked for accountability, suddenly I was the villain. At first, I tried to explain that it wasn't about kicking anyone out. It was about survival, about partnership, about fairness. But they didn't want to hear it. Every word I said was twisted into another accusation. It was like arguing with a wall that kept throwing bricks back at me. Eventually, I stopped. I stood up, walked to the bedroom, gathered my things quietly, and left for work. I thought a day apart would help cool things down, and they'd think it through, realize I wasn't the enemy. But what happened next made it crystal clear where I stood in that house. A month passed after I had that uncomfortable conversation about cutting back on expenses. But nothing changed. Amber still spent like the bills paid themselves. Her sisters were still lounging around, jobless, adding more to the grocery list than the house budget could handle. No one even acknowledged what I said. It was as if they decided, collectively, that I didn't matter, as long as the money kept showing up in the account. I was growing resentful, not just at them, but at myself, for allowing it, for financing my own disrespect. Then the company sent me out of town for a 2-day trip. I was selected to represent our team for a business deal. It wasn't optional. I knew I had to go. Before I packed my bags, I opened my banking app to send some money to the joint account Amber used, like it was her personal allowance. I hovered over the transfer button like I always did before a trip. But this time, I didn't press it. I closed the app. It was a boundary and a quiet statement. I'm not going to keep enabling this. I had simply withheld what was no longer being appreciated. 2 days later, I flew back, worn out from meetings, hotel food, and non-stop negotiation. I just wanted to go home and take a hot bath. I drove up to the house around 8 p.m. My key didn't work in the front door. At first, I thought maybe I was just tired and fumbling. I tried again. And again. Nothing. I walked to the side door, same thing. Then I looked up and noticed lights on in the living room. Someone was definitely home. I knocked. No response. I knocked louder, nothing. Then I called Amber's phone. No answer. I called again. And again. 10 times. I remember the exact number because I could feel my patience draining with each unanswered ring. On the 10th try, she finally picked up. I asked her to open the door. She said, without any shame, "We changed the locks. Your things are outside. You should reflect on your actions." I stood there with my bag still in hand. I looked around, and sure enough, there were my things, a couple of suitcases, a box with some of my shoes, my shaving kit, just thrown on top. I didn't know how to feel. I just stood there, stunned. That was the night something in me shifted. I pulled out my phone immediately and tried calling Amber again. Straight to voicemail. I tried her sisters, every single one of them. Blocked. All of them had shut me out. I didn't want to make a scene, so I sat in my car and just stared at the steering wheel for a long time. Eventually, I called my lawyer. I wasn't even sure what to say at first. I told him everything. He told me to find a hotel for the night and keep my cool. So I did. I checked into a modest place in town. Didn't even bother unpacking. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay on that stiff hotel mattress, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the last 10 years of my life. By sunrise, I stopped feeling sorry for myself. I stopped waiting for an apology. I realized that if they could exile me from my own home so easily, they didn't respect me. Not as a husband. Not as a provider. Not as a human being. And that was when I decided, no more being taken for granted. I got on my phone and started making changes. First, I logged into my bank accounts and changed all the login credentials. Every single one. Then I canceled every shared credit card. I wasn't about to keep financing their comfortable little setup. Anything tied to Amber financially, I cut off. Later that morning, I met with my lawyer in person. He brought in 2 more people. One focused on divorce, and the other a real estate attorney. It felt serious now, but I needed that. Since the house was fully in my name, they told me I had every right to file for eviction against Amber's sisters. They had no lease, no legal claim to the property. As far as the law was concerned, they were unauthorized occupants. We started preparing the paperwork immediately. My legal team debated whether to treat it as a formal eviction or a swift removal under property law for non-tenant squatters. But because this involved family and emotions were high, we knew we had to tread carefully. I also asked about getting a temporary order for exclusive use of the house, basically asking the court to grant me sole access while the divorce was being sorted. But the judge denied that, said that unless there was evidence of danger or abuse, Amber had just as much right to remain in the house during the proceedings. That one stung. I just wanted my space back. But the law didn't work that way. So now, I had to play the long game. The locks may have been changed, but my mindset was now locked in too. And this time I wasn't backing down. When the divorce proceedings began, I wasn't bitter. I had reached a point where I no longer needed to scream, argue, or prove anything. The silence was enough. So when the lawyers stepped in, it didn't take long before it was clear to everyone that the house would likely remain mine. I had all the evidence showing I was the one keeping that roof over everyone's head. And that's when she started changing her tone. Suddenly, the coldness she once threw at me turned into warmth. She started calling me by my pet name again, asking how I was doing, offering to cook, and trying to strike up conversations that didn't happen before. It was awkward, honestly, like watching someone flip a switch and forget you saw the wires hanging. But I didn't buy into it. I had already reflected. I had already processed the hurt, the betrayal, the fact that she and her sisters felt bold enough to lock me out of my own house and toss my things out like I was some stranger. No amount of soft words was going to erase that. The marriage officially ended not long after. The judge ruled, and the house stayed with me, mainly because the financial contributions were in black and white. There was no argument there. But after everything wrapped up, the house didn't feel like home anymore. It was too big, too full of memories that no longer served me. So I made a choice to put the house on the market. I sold it months later and walked away. With the money, I rented a smaller place that fit just me. Amber got a settlement from the divorce. The court made sure of that. I gave what was due. But within a few months, that money ran out. I heard through a mutual acquaintance. Maybe poor planning. Maybe the lifestyle caught up. Maybe she thought the money would last forever. I didn't ask. It wasn't my place anymore. I had reflected as she told me, and I had moved on. It had been almost a year since the divorce papers were finalized. I hadn't heard from Amber in all that time, and honestly, I wasn't expecting to. We'd gone our separate ways. I had spent that year quietly rebuilding, piece by piece. I finally had room to breathe without walking on eggshells every day. Then one afternoon, I got a message from Amber. It was short, straight to the point. She said she wanted to talk. A part of me hesitated, not out of anger, but because I wasn't sure what there was left to say. But curiosity won, and I called her back. She didn't beat around the bush. She said she had gotten a job after everything fell apart, but that it barely covered her rent and food. She wasn't calling to ask for money, not directly, at least, but you could hear the weight in her voice. She finally felt what I had carried for years. I just said, now you understand. She had never respected the effort it took to hold a home together. Knowing that she wasn't calling for anything serious, I hung up that call. I was no longer stuck in a house where my value was tied to what I could pay for. Thank you for watching.